Good afternoon, my friends. I hope you're doing well. So, while everyone is kind of coming to a close with regard to talking about Godzilla King of the Monsters, I'm going to be one of those people who says, no, I'm going to keep talking about it because I still think there's many interesting conversations to have about the film, and this conversation is largely inspired by some social media conversations I've had over the past few weeks since the film came out at the end of May, and it all centers around the nuclear narrative in Godzilla King of the Monsters and whether or not it misuses that narrative. For those of you who do not know what the nuclear narrative is, the nuclear narrative is the original narrative Gojira 1954 created. It depicts Godzilla as being this metaphor for the horrors of nuclear war, nuclear power, atomic bombs, and there have been some questions and some kind of concern about how the Legendary Universe has chosen to depict that story. If we recall back in the 2014 Godzilla film, nuclear weapons were kind of treated in this cavalier fashion. In fact, it changes Godzilla's nuclear background and suggesting that the atomic tests in the Pacific back in the 40s and 50s were not tests, but actual moments where they tried killing Godzilla with atomic weapons. And so that is a drastic change from what we get in the original Gojira film and other backstory films like 1991's Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. And so my big question is, does Godzilla King of the Monsters improve Legendary's use of the nuclear narrative? And is it necessary for there to be a nuclear narrative in American Godzilla films? So I want to lodge both of those questions to the side for a second because I really want to talk about a few other things from especially the Godzilla 2014 film and King of the Monsters that I feel like could be concerning with regard to this narrative. For example, again, coming back to that whole really lackadaisy use of nuclear weapons in the Godzilla 2014 film, at a certain point in the film, they make the decision to use a nuclear bomb detonated 20 miles away from San Francisco as a means to lure Godzilla and the Mutos to their destruction, even though they were pretty much well aware that nuclear weapons did not really destroy Godzilla in the first place. So of course they made the argument, well, this nuclear weapon's going to be stronger, so on and so forth. But the fact that they so easily made the decision to use nuclear weapons as a means to destroy these creatures relatively close to a large metropolitan area, that definitely diverts from Godzilla's original nuclear narrative, alright? Because there really isn't much conversation in that film about the horrors of nuclear energy. I mean, we get some moments where, nuclear power ends up being the demise of certain characters, of course, but when it comes to making the decision to use it actively as a weapon, there really isn't much conversation or much deliberation about it. Now, let's zoom forward to Godzilla King of the Monsters, okay? So in Godzilla King of the Monsters, much like Godzilla 2014, there really isn't a nuclear narrative in progress at all that talks about the horrors of nuclear energy. In fact, the decision was made by Ken Watanabe's character to use a nuclear warhead to detonate next to Godzilla in order to empower him in some way. And that was a very, I mean, it wasn't an easy decision to make in the sense that he was sacrificing himself, which was very noble in my opinion, considering the character's past with nuclear energy, with his family having some sort of trauma associated with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But the decision to get to that point, militarily, was extremely non-existent. So it almost seemed like everybody has, backpack carryable nuclear weapons readily available to use if this type of situation should arise. So yeah, I can see why that would be concerning. It definitely doesn't follow the same narrative that paints nuclear weaponry as being something devastating, extremely dangerous, and something that should be not used at all. So again, I mean, we could even branch the whole discussion into a conversation about how weapons of mass destruction are used in these films. I mean, taking point in Godzilla King of the Monsters, the oxygen destroyer, which they painted as this new weapon, it was sprung along very quickly in this entire movie's narrative, and I mean, there really wasn't much discussion of the ramifications of using it until the post-credit scene. And, like, it almost just felt like the movie's pacing kind of prevented the audience from understanding the significance and the horror of using these types of weapons in order to, you know, create some sort of change or sway the battles. So, again, this brings me back to the question of, does this film and the Legendary Monster universe misuse the nuclear narrative? In my opinion, I don't think it does, because I don't think it was the job of these films to recycle and reuse the same nuclear narrative as movies like, say, Shin Godzilla and the original Godzilla movie use. I don't think that's our place, as, like, especially since these movies are being made by an American company, because our country doesn't have that historical trauma associated with nuclear weapons like, say, countries like Japan does, for example. And I almost feel like for us to utilize that same nuclear narrative as the original Godzilla film, that would almost be disrespectful and an insult. However, do I think that there should have been a little bit more ominousness used in association with bringing these weapons of mass destruction into these films? Yes. I really think there could have been more, like, conflict between the characters about it, more decision-making, more conversation within these films about how dangerous it is to actually use these types of things. That, I feel like, would have been a more sensible nod to that original nuclear narrative. I feel like, I think these films create its own nuclear narrative. However, I don't think they have enough conversation about how significant it is, and how devastating it can be, and how dangerous it can be to use these types of weapons. So, anyway, share your thoughts in the comment section below. These are just my meanderings about the subject, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.